The Vietnam War, which raged from the late 1950s to 1975, was one of the most consequential conflicts of the Cold War era. It involved a struggle between North Vietnam, led by the communist government under Ho Chi Minh, and South Vietnam, supported by the United States and other anti-communist allies. Understanding why the Vietnam War broke out requires examining the historical, political, and international factors that transformed Vietnam from a French colony into a Cold War battleground. Colonial history and the roots of conflict. Vietnam's modern history set the stage for the later war. French colonial rule 1858 to 1945. Vietnam, part of French Indochina, was under colonial rule for nearly a century. The French imposed heavy taxes, exploited resources, and suppressed nationalist movements, creating widespread resentment. Rise of nationalist and communist movements. Vietnamese leaders like Ho Chi Minh founded the Indochinese Communist Party, 1930, to fight for independence. Nationalist movements sought self-determination, often combining anti-colonial goals with communist ideology. Japanese occupation during World War II, 1940 to 1945. Japan occupied Vietnam, weakening French authority and creating a power vacuum. The Viet Minh, led by Ho Chi Minh, gained influence by organizing resistance against Japan and promoting nationalist ideals. After Japan's defeat in 1945, the power vacuum led to a struggle between the Viet Minh, French colonial forces, and other nationalist factions. The First Indochina War and the division of Vietnam. French attempts to reassert control. France returned after World War II to reclaim its colony, leading to the First Indochina War, 1946 to 1954. Viet Minh resistance. Ho Chi Minh's forces employed guerrilla tactics, winning popular support and territorial control. Battle of Dien Bien Phu, 1954. A decisive Viet Minh victory ended French colonial ambitions in Indochina. Geneva Accords, 1954. Vietnam was temporarily divided at the 17th parallel. North Vietnam, communist, led by Ho Chi Minh. South Vietnam, anti-communist, led by Ngo Dinh Diem, supported by the United States. The division was intended to be temporary, with nationwide elections planned for 1956 to reunify the country, a plan never realized. Political factors leading to war. Ngo Dinh Diem's authoritarian rule. Diem refused to hold nationwide elections, fearing a communist victory. His regime alienated many South Vietnamese, particularly Buddhists and rural communities, fueling internal opposition. Rise of the Viet Cong. The National Liberation Front, NLF, or Viet Cong, emerged in the South as a communist insurgency. Supported by North Vietnam, the Viet Cong sought to undermine Diem's government through guerrilla warfare and political infiltration. Political repression and corruption. South Vietnam's government faced corruption, nepotism, and lack of legitimacy, which increased popular support for the Viet Cong. International and Cold War dynamics. Containment policy and U.S. involvement. The United States viewed Vietnam as a critical front in the global struggle against communism. The domino theory posited that if Vietnam fell to communism, neighboring countries in Southeast Asia would follow. U.S. support began with economic and military aid, escalating to full-scale involvement after the Gulf of Tonkin Incident, 1964. Soviet and Chinese support for North Vietnam. North Vietnam received military, financial, and technical aid from the Soviet Union and China. This support enabled Ho Chi Minh to maintain a protracted insurgency against South Vietnam and U.S. forces. Global Cold War context. Vietnam became a proxy battlefield, with the U.S. and its allies backing South Vietnam, and communist powers supporting the North. The war was thus both nationalist and ideological, blending local struggles with international geopolitics. Socioeconomic and cultural factors. Land reform and peasant support. In the North, communist-led land reforms won support from peasants, providing recruits for the Viet Minh and later the Viet Cong. Ethnic and religious divisions. Tensions between Buddhists and Catholics as well as ethnic minorities created internal instability in South Vietnam. Rural versus urban divide. The Viet Cong exploited rural dissatisfaction with Diem's policies, while the South Vietnamese government remained largely urban-centric. Immediate triggers of the Vietnam War. Political assassinations and coups. In 1963, Diem was overthrown and assassinated, creating political instability in South Vietnam. Successive weak governments struggled to control the Viet Cong insurgency. Escalation of U.S. military involvement. Following attacks on U.S. naval vessels in the Gulf of Tonkin, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, 1964, granting President Johnson authority to escalate military action. By 1965, ground combat troops were deployed, signaling the official start of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. North Vietnamese offensive strategy. North Vietnam and the Viet Cong intensified attacks to force the U.S. into a prolonged war, hoping to exploit political and public opinion weaknesses. The Vietnam War broke out due to a complex combination of historical, political, and international factors. The legacy of colonialism and the struggle for independence fueled Vietnamese nationalism. The division of Vietnam and refusal to hold elections created political legitimacy crises. Cold War geopolitics turned Vietnam into a proxy battleground, with the US, USSR, and China heavily involved. Socioeconomic, cultural, and rural-urban dynamics further destabilized South Vietnam, providing fertile ground for insurgency. Ultimately, the Vietnam War was not simply a conflict between North and South Vietnam. It was a global ideological struggle, a nationalist liberation movement, and a tragic case of political miscalculation, illustrating how local conflicts can become magnified by international Cold War dynamics.